I think every technical revolution or evolution has had a good impact on humanity, and it's also had some negative impacts on humanity. It's critical that we think about ethics at all times, right? And when we think about ethics, we're thinking about what's the best outcome for the humans, right? And it's important for us to think about, what we need as people. Obviously, in some of the more recent tech evolutions, for example, with social media, I think the ethical questions were they were asked, but they weren't adequately answered. I think now, I have a daughter who's 14 and a son who's 12. I'm living the impact of social media sort of having evolved in a way that hadn't considered the negative impacts ultimately on children and others. I think one of the challenges is oftentimes companies have primarily a profit mindset. And the primary stakeholder that they're building for is the shareholder, not necessarily for a cast of additional stakeholders. So I think it's really important as we are venturing into this era of AI and automation for us to think about who these stakeholders are. And they can't just be the shareholders. We need to think about not just people who are like us when we're designing and developing products. We need to think about people who aren't like us. And oftentimes when we have a broader perspective on who we're building and designing for, it helps inform better ethics ultimately. I really think we have a huge responsibility to think about the sort of next level consequences and then the second level consequences and the third level consequences. I think some of the sort of the first consequences here are, I think, questions around trust and can we understand, can we believe and understand the data and where is that leading us? I think some of the next level consequences, and these are the ones that people are concerned about, really concerned about, are job displacement. I think for that, what we need to focus on is preparing ourselves to upskill people. I see AI ushering in a new era of productivity and efficiency, which makes it possible for any person to be able to accomplish more. But it's important for everybody to be trained on these new technologies so they can take advantage of them. And I think that's actually the responsibility of our employers. I think there's also some responsibility for our government to ensure that we are upskilling people and that we hold companies accountable for doing that for their own employees. So I see that as sort of the next level challenge when it comes to AI. And then, of course, there's this real concern about AGI, which is basically an AI that is as intelligent as humans or hyper intelligent, far more intelligent than humans. And there's a concern that that AGI will actually do things that aren't in the interest of humanity. So I think this is probably one of the most consequential ethical questions that we need to ask now. And you already see countries and regions like in the EU enacting AI policy that is in response to some of those sort of downstream concerns. So I think it's important for us to consider that as well. My personal stance is that I do think it's important for us to have regulations on the extent to what AI can actually do, because I do have a personal concern that we may hit a point where we may not be able to control AI, and I'm not a hyper-techno optimist. So I do think it's critical that we have government regulations that help us prepare for that future. One of the challenges, though, with this all is that you can't control open source. Many of the AI models have been released, a lot of these LLMs have been released in the open source market. So Facebook sort of is the most prominent example of this, the releasing Llama. And once it's open source, people can do whatever they want with it. And so I think there's a real challenge here around balancing responsibility associated with the most downstream potential impact of AI. And again, why is Facebook releasing this? It's probably because there's, some position that they want to take within the market. And that's what's driving the strategy. I think it's important for governments to be focused on some of those secondary concerns, really focused on making sure that their economies are able to absorb the impact of efficiency and that their working population is able to all benefit from the impact of efficiencies in technology. So I think that's one of the most important areas for governments to focus on, which is, making sure their citizens are upskilled. My hope is that with AI technology, the actual, user experience of the AI technology will be a lot simpler than most software today. So when I say upskill, it's not like your average person now needs to learn how to, use Premiere or like Logic, which is an extremely complex program, right? Instead, people will need to learn how to interface with new AI technologies, which will be actually easier because if you can just speak to them, they're going to be quite easy to use. But it's important for people to think in a different way about how they use tools and technology to get their work done. I think that's the important area where we need to upskill people. Well, I think so. First, it comes down to: is it an ethical business? Is ethics part of your calculation? Hopefully, it is, right? Hopefully, we have evolved to the state at which most businesses see value in having a focus on ethics when it comes to the technology use and deployment on the one side, and then sustainability practices on the other side. It's not an either or. It's not an equation where you either are sustainable, and you're ethical, or you're not. It's just seen as the way that you operate. And my hope is that customers will demand that, and that businesses will respond to their customers' demand. My hope is as well that governments will enact policy that helps guide decision-making at the company level. So you'll basically have these two forces that encourage companies to be more ethical as well as more sustainable in their practices. On the one hand, your customers, you'll have more and better and more loyal customers because of your sustainability and ethical practices. And furthermore, you won't offend or alienate customers because you've had some blunder from a sustainability or ethical standpoint. And on the other side, you'll have government support, whether it's funding for certain practices or whether there's some sort of regulations that's guiding you. So that's my hope, is that we'll have this ecosystem, customers, government, and companies all sort of working in concert to practice better ethics when it comes to tech and also better sustainability practices. I think if you look at the United States, it's a totally different matter than if you look at other companies where there's more of a focus on the collective. So, I think in the States, oftentimes you see this reduction in regulations as a sort of stimulus to the economy and to innovation. And it certainly is the case that within Silicon Valley, there is a mindset around, I guess you could call it the techno-optimism, where if you just let technology and technologists sort of build with unbridled regulation, the ultimate outcome is going to be good for humanity. It's, I think, a relatively blind optimism if you look at the history of what we've done so far. It really depends on the jurisdiction, the country, and the culture of the country where the innovation is happening.